Morning all, let's have a look at the game between Yifan Hou and Magnus Carlsen in the Tata Steel round 9. It's a pretty long haul game, so you might want to take this in steps to watch this video. I can't promise too much excitement for a while, but you'll see very good positional and other techniques in this game. Yifan plays e4, and after e5, knight f3, knight c6, doesn't play a royal place, but instead plays the Ponziani, which of course Magnus played in an earlier round. Magnus adopts a solid system that he's aware of. His only concern is that there's so many different ways of playing against Ponziani, which way is best or practical, so he adopts this system, which has some vague similarities to a kind of Alekhine defense strategy, provoking the knight to go on the queen side, allowing white to play this e5. So a bit of kind of provocation from black, but black gets a very solid position soon. Knight d5, bishop c4, the knight goes all the way to the queen side. Okay, so here we see bishop b3 and now d5. So liberating the bishop here, and it looks as though black has an equal position already out of the opening. It doesn't seem such a big deal for white. White does have, of course, an apparently nice centre. It's not underminable, of course, with c5 blocked in by the knight here, but this is an undermining operation which is available to black. f6. If black wants to kind of encourage white to take her and maybe get this g file later, that could be interesting. Alternatively, just get the c5 square for the bishop in one go. But here f6 might be completely premature. Actually, we see bishop g4. Okay, and Magnus is setting up a threat already. Perhaps bishop takes f3, and if queen takes, then knight takes d4. White doesn't really want double pawns, so bishop e3 supports the d4 pawn. So interestingly, perhaps, an early undermining move, as I've mentioned, f6, is actually played in this position, with d5 quite solid because of this knight here. This bishop's kind of blunted out of the game, and f6 looks actually very justified and appropriate in this type of position. And in fact, if we have e takes here, white might be faced with a kingside attack after g takes and she castles kingside because of this g file. Magnus could also, of course, take with the queen here, but in this position, okay, white just left that central tension, and Yifan just castled in this position. And Magnus plays now queen d7 with very aggressive intent, it seems, of getting a game which in theory is going to be very exciting, castling on opposite sides of the board, and associated with that are often very crude looking aggressive moves like h5 and g5 sometimes. We see h3, bishop h5, and an interesting tactical shot already in this position is played to Yifan Hou's credit for wanting to take the fight to Magnus, and very good calculation skills, of course, demonstrated not to miss this shot. White plays e6. So should Magnus be worried about this e6? Well, I think this is something for the second pass technical analysis. On queen takes e6, for example, there might be knight, queen takes e6, there might be knight g5, hitting the queen, hitting the bishop. This bishop is a loose piece, the queen is loose here, and this could get quite complicated. But we'll check that out in the second pass. In the game, Magnus actually sidestepped all the analysis just with queen d6. The queen might be a tactical target. Pardon me. To knight c3 and knight b5 at some point soon, and in fact after knight c3, knight b5 clearly has to be factored in. Magnus just castles though, not worried about knight b5 here. His queen has got some squares available. E7 if b4 is not available here. Okay, so we see the move a4, a5, and of course the queen can also take on e6. Of course, that's not a poison pawn or anything. Perhaps in some of these lines, unless knight g5 is again a key resource, and this is actually tested now. Knight b5. So does the queen want to go to b4, e7? We'll just take on e6. Actually, he takes on e6 here. Now on knight g5, this might not work at all well as before, but white actually plays bishop f4, so aggressive intentions, going for c7. That's protected by Magnus. Rook e1, kicking the queen like this. Queen f7. Now we see rook c1. So for the sacrificed pawn, white sacrificed that e6. White's got very nice looking rooks actually at the moment, and seemingly a dangerous amount of pressure on this queen side where the black king lives. So it looks on the surface quite a dangerous position for Magnus indeed. Is it really completely solid? Well, bishop b4 asks the rook to move on e1, rook e3. Okay, and here I believe in the post-mortem kind of analysis which Magnus did, I think this next move he considered a blunder. His next move looks quite logical, g5, to try and whip up an attack against white's king, maybe get the open g file against white's king. But there's a flaw with all this. After bishop h2, we see knight c4 now, and after bishop takes, d takes, queen c2, attacking c4, and there's quite uncomfortable pressure on black here. Magnus plays bishop takes f3, rook takes f3, and simplifies with knight takes d4, knight takes d4, rook takes d4. So a lot of simplification, but the flaw associated with g5 is exposed here, and this might imply that actually if g5 hadn't been played, knight c4 would have been actually more effective without this next move available from white. So I believe maybe there's some slip up in calculation here, but white now played the strong move bishop e5. So f6 is a problem. That's a weakness of playing g5. f6 is actually a problem here. Nevertheless, we see rook d2, check. Okay, and we still have a fight ahead. White wins f6. Magnus at the moment is still a pawn up. 3, 4, 5, 6 against 5. He's a pawn up, but it's going to be a bit of a battle ahead. Bishop g3 is played. Okay, now here we see that this pawn is kind of loose, and so is this one. Magnus actually plays rook d4, protecting c4 for a moment. Is it possible to actually take on g5? That's an interesting question here. White actually played rook f1, maybe wary, it seems, about rook d1 being check perhaps. And this g pawn is free now to move. That's something again to check out in the second pass about taking pawn. So g4. Magnus still a pawn up. If the rook takes g4. Okay, it is double pawns though. Is there going to be a really pass pawn to be realised here? Rook f4, h5. More simplification. Rook c1, and now a very, very neat move. Although Magnus is only a pawn up, this is a very beautiful idea coming up here to solve some problems with c4 and the c file generally. So making his king a little bit safer and putting the pressure on white. What would you play in this position if you were playing black? So coming down the board, if you were playing black, If I give you 10 seconds, starting from now. Okay, black plays c3, just giving the pawn back. Breaking up white's pawns, two isolated pawns. c-file is made safer. A pin is set up after b takes c3 on f2. So rook e2 is more effective than before as well, any rook e2s. And coming down to the 7th rank with the queen maybe later. Okay, white plays queen g5, hitting bishop and keeping hold of this pawn for a moment, putting the pressure on the pawn still. b6. Then we see c4. Rook e4, which frees the queen actually potentially to come down, potentially, or just doubling is possible. Maybe queen e6 or something, just to threaten rook e1 at some point. Queen g6. The rook moves to that threat. King f1. And here we see a tactical move. Queen d2, which looks actually very, very scary, hitting c1, and also potentially rook f2 is on the cards. But it offers g4 with check. That's taken. And it's winning rook. Magnus has calculated all this. Queen takes e2. So we get a more simplified endgame position now. Picking up c4. It's still tricky though, picking up a4. White has two connected passed pawns here, but this bishop needs to get out of the way. These pawns seem intuitively they should be faster, especially this a pawn should be faster than this g pawn. Bishop has to get out of the way. Bishop e5, stopping any queen a1s there. Bishop d4, that's taken. And now g4, the pawn is underway. Queen d5, threatening mate in 1. Check. Now queen a4. Now here it's very interesting to check this in the second pass, and I'm just going to add a note definitely to check out here, because apparently Magnus made a bit of a boo-boo and he said it was very, very silly, this next move, but I'm not entirely sure. I understand why. I'm not sure many people would understand entirely why, because it doesn't seem like that much of a blunder, this move coming up next. It seems quite logical in many respects, at least this next move. Magnus played b5, so the queen is protecting d1. He wants to get queen d1 check, and one would assume to win g4 in certain circumstances, and ideally with check. So I guess that the finesse of the blunder here is that after taking on a5, taking on g4 doesn't have to be with check, because white has this resource which maybe Magnus missed, queen e1, so there's no king g2, queen takes g4 with check. Now I assume that's the basis for why it was classified as a blunder. And if this is the case, that the queen e1 resource was missed, there might have been something more effective in this position instead of b5 here. Okay, but still, black still got the advantage here, surely, because it's 2-1, and this pawn's quite mobile, it seems. But let's see what happens. Queen e5, check, check, and now the pawn's ready to roll again. b4. So what's the problem here? f4, b3. The b pawn looks very, very close to landing here. f5. Okay. Obviously the queen has got its eye on b2 here, and there's various checks to factor in, so it's not that easy. King a6 is played. We see check and king b6. Queen h8. Queen's dancing around the board here. Check, check, and now this b2. It looks pretty ominous. Well, white's checks run out. Check, 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 check. White's checks are running out. The king a1. Queen e5, pinning the pawn. Okay. In this position, Magnus actually plays c5. And actually Yifan in this position resigned. So let's check this position with an engine why exactly White may have resigned here. So say f6 is played. Well, now we find our answer quite quickly. Queen d4 is supported by c5. It's not to do with the c pawn itself coming down. It's to do with queen d4. So this pawn is now unpinned, and the checks will surely... Well, there's no checks here. They've run out. So black is queening. So c5 is a killer move here. c5. Just for queen d4. Okay, we really need to go behind the scenes of this game. And let's flip the board and check out, you know, did black have a reasonable position here? We can do a reference check here. This is probably a rare bird position, I assume, or is it? It could be transposed into something much more common, which actually is very likely as well. So let's see, a reference check here, 497 games from this position. C takes d4 is the most common, 327 games. Actually, so bishop c4 less common, 34 games. Someone called Cermak has played bishop c4 here. So has black got a comfortable position? Knight b6, 32 games is the top move. We've gone rapidly out of opening territory already, with black seemingly having a comfortable position and no major players playing this stuff. Okay, very low FIDE rated players playing with this system. It's not really adopted much by GMs, especially super GMs. This position. It looks as though black may have comfortably equalised. First question that I'm interested in, anyway, about f6, just out of interest. Does f6 work here? It could be premature, it seems. White could castle. And now what is black doing? On bishop g4 here, this is much more dangerous than the game, surely. E takes... We have bishop g5 or queen e1 check. Bishop g5. We got some complications there anyway. So the way Magnus is playing it, he's playing bishop g4 first before f6. So white hasn't castled yet, so haven't got any checking opportunities yet, and white's actually blocked the e file in any case. So f6 is not really that effective before bishop g4 and bishop e3. This is making f6 a playable move now. Even the engine likes f6 here. With the e file blocked, it seems a logical thing to do. If Magnus had naturally, well, say he'd played a move like queen d7 though, would that be really so inferior? Say white castles, well, it's just the game, isn't it? It's just the game. So he plays f6. We see white castling, queen d7. Okay. And now we see the move h3. And the bishop went to h5 here, and the engine factors in actually e6, and probably Magnus did as well. Forcing moves need to be factored in, and e6 is a major forcing move here in this position, even though it looks a bit strange perhaps. But e6, and apparently technically at this depth white's equal. Now if black had taken, this is interesting, so knight g5, hitting the queen, hitting the bishop. What can black do? If Magnus takes queen, knight takes, bishop takes, knight takes. Let's go with king f7, knight takes. This knight is really munching everything in sight. It's coming to munch b6 as well. And white would be better after this long set of exchanging transactions. White's slightly better in this position here. Long forcing sequence, not too many branches, so had to be considered, I think, by both players. Absolutely considered. This e6. The other way, let's have a look. So instead of bishop d1, Just taking here looks pretty dangerous because of the check, but is it? G6 takes. Bishop E7. White seems to have a small something here, so Magnus wanted to avoid this, and he said as much. He didn't like the style of the position or something in his analysis of this game, his own analysis of this game, which is available actually on the excellent Tata Steel. There's an excellent Facebook coverage wall, which is actually very unique for this sort of tournament. So I don't know if more tournaments in the future will use Facebook and Twitter so aggressively, but it seems between Tata and the London Classic, a lot of innovations have been made in the dissemination of information and coverage and player interviews after. We're getting a lot more empathy for how the players felt, what they thought about than ever before, I think, and so we're privileged in that respect to get these insights. But he didn't like this sort of position, apparently, for F takes G5. So, and I would recommend you checking out his analysis here. So this is just with using an engine, so I'm cheating compared to Magnus, but it seems everything he said so far looks absolutely correct. There's no bust or anything, there's no major surprise. He plays Queen D6, just sidestepping all this business and leaving black with a small advantage, leaving the pin in place. Just Queen D6, just Queen D6. Simple chess, as they say. Simple chess is often very, very effective. You don't have to be a supercomputer to examine all the implications of knight G5. This pawn can be picked up later at a more convenient point. It's not going anywhere. It's not going backwards, for sure. Okay, so white plays knight C3. There is, though, some implications about knight B5 and the queen safety here as a target on D6. Now, after castling, well, the immediate question that begins again is Queen E6 actually possible? If white had played knight B5 immediately in this position, Queen E6 apparently is more favourable than before. This knight G5 probably doesn't work at all here. In fact, because of Queen takes E3, that just wins a piece now. Totally different position we're in, where it seems to be just absolutely winning material. There's no little trick like that anymore. But so knight B5 is just asking for the pawn, I believe, just to be taken. But white plays A4. Okay, so A5 reacting. Is there a threat of A5 from white? And then after that, maybe D5, A5, D5, possibly. So A5 is simply stops, not minding about the B5 square being used here. White's getting this pawn sacrifice a little bit with a little bit more compensation with the knight installed here, and having forced A5, giving up the pawn now is still giving white a reasonable position now. C7 is an issue that has to be defended. Rook D7 apparently seems to be one of the better ways of defending it here, given that there might not be any other ways of defending it apart from the awkward looking drunken knight A8, which is not where you want your knights. So Rook D7 seems much more sensible. The knight is also doing a good job on D5, so it doesn't want to do anything that silly. So Rook E1, Queen F7. Okay, Magnus has been pushed around for a moment, but now at least with Queen F7 these pieces are protecting each other. The Queen's protecting the bishop now. He's still got that pin, but white's got this freedom to seemingly put some pressure on this C file. So Rook C1, what is actually white threatening here? Is there any direct threat? Bishop C2, Bishop G3, Rook E2, nothing really amazing on the horizon actually, because always there's Bishop G6 eventually to parry Bishop C2 for Bishop F5. So white plays, Magnus plays Bishop B4, which looks like a good move. He's got his rook out to play if he wants. Now here, okay, he played the move G5, and I suspected, well, I got the impression there was some regret with this move, not playing a knight C4 immediately. So knight C4 kind of stems the flow of white's attack on that c-file. It blocks up that c-file. The engine at this depth actually likes g5 and doesn't mention knight c4 here. So what is going on here with knight c4? Let's have a quick look. In this position, okay, let's say white takes. White can play g4, let's go with that to unpin. Knight d2 to try and win c4 now. Bishop d3, protecting c4. b3, and it looks quite fragile. If white can get this pressure back on the black king, it looks dangerous. Let's go with g5, trying to maybe play for h5 or something. No, in this position now, it looks as though knight takes d4 is good. Well, anyway, it doesn't look that convincing anyway to play knight c4. It doesn't look such a big deal compared to the game continuation, this knight c4 here. And the engine actually likes Magnus's move anyway, so g5 at depth 19. g5, okay. The bishop went back to h2. Black's apparently better here, but knight c4, maybe knight c4 here was the mistake. It wasn't needed. After knight c4 we see an evaluation drop a little bit. So a better move maybe from an engine point of view anyway. King b8. Let's go with king b8. And then what? So h6. Solidifying g5. Bishop g6. h5. This looks dangerous now, potentially, for g4 coming up. So was there any need to play this knight c4? In fact, here, this looks quite tasty now, bishop d6. What's going wrong with the valuation? Is it because of this imminent kingside attack? Let's follow this a little bit through. Could Magnus have basically played this a little bit more like Mikhail Tal to try and open up the kingside? This attack needs some preparation for sure, but eventually it seems g4 is written on the wall here as a move to play eventually. Maybe after one pair of rooks comes off. Rook d7. Nope. Again, knight c4 is maybe better here than before. Okay, so maybe the idea of g4 is not so hot after all. It seems Magnus's conception of playing for knight c4 is going to be good at some point. So what does actually knight c4 do? Well, tactically, of course, it attacks these guys. It's encouraging getting rid of this bishop. It's encouraging double pawns, frontal pressure on d4, blocking white's kingside attack. It does quite a lot, actually. But why was it not so spectacular in effect in the game? Because after taking, okay, we saw the move queen c2 here, and Magnus took on f3. Is bishop takes f3 a slight inaccuracy? Why not just continue the frontal attack on d4 with rook hd8? That seems a logical move as well. Threatening. Bishop takes f3, of course, if needed. Let's go with queen f5. Let's go with this. And d4 will surely drop off soon, or not? See, we're going very far here. Black should be better, but okay, it's coming maybe to d5. That d5 square is useful here as well. So let's go back. So in the game we saw the more forcing continuation. Bishop takes f3, and just taking d4 immediately, much simpler continuation, just getting rid of quite a few pieces. Inviting bishop e5. Okay, check. And black's tiny bit better, as usual. It seems in Magnus games he's always a tiny bit better. Plays rook d4 here. Now on queen takes g5, is there something remarkably obvious about this that doesn't work because of queen d1 or something? If queen takes g5, no, there is something obvious about it. Bishop d2 is embarrassing. It forks queen and rook. Bishop d2 is just crushing. So it's good she avoided that little trap. Queen takes g5 is not on, so Magnus has just protected this pawn, and this is indirectly protected. So rook f1 is played. So now I assume queen g5 is actually a threat. Now, so that pawn's moved. Hg rook g4. Okay, rook f4. More simplification on the cards after h5. And Magnus still slightly better here. So this move c3 is actually liked by the engine as well, just giving up that c-pawn. It's the least hassle decision. Why does black want loads of hassle here on the c-file? And it's double pawns anyway. So if you're going to throw some ballast away, why not let it be double pawns if it improves all your pieces and stops all your opponent's pieces using the only sort of semi-open file. So the move c3 has a lot of beauty behind it. Okay, so it's taken. Not too many choices. It's taken. If it's not, well then bishop c5 anyway, maybe. Let's see, queen g6, or even just waiting for it to be taken. So let's not get into that too far. So it is taken. And black looks very comfortable, and in fact the engine even likes starting to perk up with black's position. But visually, from a human point of view, this looks very aesthetic to break up black's pawn, the white pawns, to have the bishop striking at f2, the rook staring down as though it's going to come to the 7th, and so is the queen. The queen's actually on a4 here as well, which is not totally insignificant thing. So queen g5 hits the bishop, that's protected. And now we see the move c4. So on queen takes a4, that's not protecting g4, which means that a4 can be swapped for g4. Magnus is not interested in that. So actually a4 is a target here. Rook e4, the threat is now surely queen takes a4 or not. No, actually king b7. No, of course not. Queen f5 check. The king's got to move first before anything active like queen takes a4. King's not safe enough yet on c8 here. So it's not threatening anything. The slow threat is king b7. Okay, to threaten something like a4. So we see queen g6. The rook moves. King f1. We see now queen d2, and there's something interesting here about rook a2 here to try and go for this a4 pawn. So Magnus played queen d2. If rook a2, that looks as though why isn't a4 just dropping off the board here? And then we've got this fast running a pawn, and this g pawn could suppress these two pawns. Could this be a more accurate continuation? Just taking this. Possibly. Defending against mate in 1, queen a8. Possibly this is a more comfortable continuation than the game. Now there's actually a threat of rook takes g3 here. Potentially. Okay, so in the game Magnus chose in this position queen d2. That leaves white with a little bit of fight still. Even though it looks pretty menacing actually to threaten c1 and f2, it does leave queen takes g4 with check, and that seems to be actually now all of a sudden this is loved by the engine. This move queen d2 is all of a sudden loved by the engine, allowing this pawn sack. Look at this, queen d2, depth 18. Okay, so queen d2 here. So maybe king f1 slightly inaccurate. So this continuation here is all in black's favour. Taking here. then taking a4. So we've got 3 passed pawns now on the queen side, with the threat of what is black threatening? Okay, just positioning queen c6 and getting the pawn going. So bishop e5, bishop d4, threatening now check to win that bishop. So takes, we see g4. Now, was this coming up actually a blunder, as Magnus indicated, a huge blunder after queen a4 to play b5? b5, let's see. So why is queen c6 apparently very, very strong? Queen c6, the king can get this g pawn here, I must assume, even without counting. So queen gets evicted, say to a2. Okay, should we go for a2? We can just play a4 here, with this being a lot simpler than the game. It does look as though white's got the 2 connected passed pawns. Sorry, in this position after b5, it looks a great deal simpler than the game, especially factoring queen c1 checks to win g5 here. This looks a lot simpler than the game. So it does look like a blunder in that Magnus had these connected passed pawns, and he's losing his connected passed pawns on the basis of b5, perhaps expecting to win this with check. But he's still got the advantage. It's no big deal. He's still got the advantage. So we see check here. Queen e1 being a little bit stronger than king g2, but it's actually not such a big deal. In fact, not a big deal at all here, technically, that this queen e1 was perhaps missed. We see queen e1, queen takes g4. These 2 passed pawns are still good. It's just we've got the matter of the king having to avoid all these checks and more checks. So the queen goes to c6, starting to shield the king, ready for b4. Okay, now b3. This pawn's lust to expand, as Fischer would say about passed pawns. So f5. Okay. So we see the move king a6 here, which the engine quite likes from Magnus. King a6. What other ways of playing this are there? Apparently queen d6 is possible as well. This pawn will be queening with check if the queens get exchanged off. Okay, king a6. Let's go with that anyway. Check. King b6. Queen h8. It looks pretty grim actually now for white. This looks grim after check and then check, and now b2 is pretty grim, putting white on that precipice. She can only play a lot of checks here to try and salvage something by perpetual, but the checks are just running out. So the key move here is c5, just to play queen d4, and then the pawn will queen. Okay, another intense struggle game, showing Magnus is able to convert all these positions. He's not letting anyone escape with draws in this tournament from such positions of being slightly better, which is remarkable. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.